Oh,
Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't have
remember,
to remind you.
I remembered without you having to remind me. That's right. Oh.
you know you're going to mute us during the sermon, aren't you, Lynn?
You're going to mute yourself during the sermon, yes.
Okay,
And if you don't, I have the power to do it for
I,
you.
that's what I'm saying.
We'll be sure to with these goals.
I can mute myself and we can have quiet worship, silent worship.
No,
No,
we
we're
want to hear what you have to say, Chip.
yeah we're tuning in because of you.
Well, it is that time for us to begin meeting for worship. Chip has asked me to play a song that we don't hear in Quaker meeting houses very often, but you're going to recognize it when I get going here.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. Brent is away this week, so yeah, I'm hosting. Um, do we have? I don't think we have announcements that I'm aware of. Does anybody have one that I can't think of? How about joys and concerns?
I have a lot of concerns. I'm sure the Pope would appreciate our prayers. Tomorrow will be the third anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. I'm sure they would use our prayers. And all the people that are losing their jobs, I'm sure they could use our prayers as well.
I mean, one.
Well, let's center down. Let's remember these concerns in our prayers, and maybe we have others that we just haven't shared. If you would put yourselves on mute, we'll have some open worship, and then Chip is our worship leader this morning. He'll speak out of the silence as he feels led.
Good morning, friends. I would like to take a minute to recognize that this is almost the end of Black History Month. So I asked Lynn to play Lift Every Voice and Sing. In 1919, the NAACP declared the song to be the Negro National Anthem, later the Black National Anthem. It was used primarily as a rally cry during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s, but is still quite relevant to today. Rather than give a scripture reading today, I would like to share something said by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will all going to perish together as fools. My message today may seem more like a Quaker history lesson. It's going to include time travel, Native Americans, Quakers, the Revolutionary War, and a bit of my family history. So I ask you, what do these things have in common? I'm going to tell you. But first, to get us in the mood, I would like to sing a song from the musical 1776. Just kidding. I was told Quakers don't laugh enough, so there's your laugh for today. Last month, I talked about realizing that I moved too fast and needed to slow down and enjoy the small things going on around me. In other words, stop and smell the roses. Well, let me tell you that this month things came to a screeching halt. I discovered a series called Outlander. I've often heard about people binge watching a series on TV, but never tried it, and I wondered what binge watching really was. I was soon to find out. Outlander is an adapted from the best-selling books by Diana Gabaldon. I hope I said that right. This is what Wikipedia has to say about the series. After serving as a British Army nurse in World War II, Claire Randall is enjoying a second honeymoon in Scotland with her husband Frank, an M16 officer looking forward to a new career as an Oxford historian. Suddenly, Claire is transported to 1743 and into the mysterious land where her freedom and life are threatened. To survive, she marries Jamie Fraser, a strapping Scotch warrior with a complicated past and a disarming sense of humor. A passionate relation occurs, and Claire is caught between two vast different men with two different totally lives. There are 101 episodes, and each episode is an hour long. Troy had told me about how good the series was several years ago, and after I watched 2 episodes, I was hooked. I put my life on hold and watched all 101 episodes. It took me 2.5 weeks to get to the end of season 7. Season 8 is in the works and will come out later this year. Oh yes, I need to do a disclaimer. Conservative friends may find Outlander a bit too spicy, and not in the spice term. So does the Bible say anything about the possibility of time travel? Now, you know you can Google anything that is anything, and this is what came up when I asked if time travel was possible. A site came up called Got Questions? Your Questions, Biblical Answers. And this is what I found. Now, they didn't give credit to who wrote this, so I have no idea who did. The Bible does not directly address the idea of time travel, at least not the type of time travel commonly referred to in science fiction. However, the Bible also indicates that God is independent of time. While this might be a literal type of time travel, it would be fair to say that God does not experience time in the same narrow way that human beings do. There are instances in the Bible where man are granted visions of the future. One could argue that John, for example, in the book of Revelations, had the opportunity to time travel into the future in order to observe the events of the apocalypse. Scripturally, we can't really say whether time travel is possible or impossible. Technically, we have reasons to believe that whatever happens is under God's control, meaning any possible time travel by humanity wouldn't change or interfere with these plans. Since God exists independently of time, human time travel wouldn't change our relationship to God any more than our learning how to fly, split an atom, or travel into space. Well, now that I've covered time travel, I will move on to the Revolutionary War, Quakers, and Native Americans. Now, getting back to Outlander, some of the Scots end up in the colonies at the time of the unrest with England. The Revolutionary War was about to begin, and we are introduced to a Quaker brother and sister. We learn the brother is a doctor, and because he wanted to go help the wounded soldiers, he was almost kicked out of his meeting. The Quakers were really interesting. I don't want to give too much away, but the girl is asked about heaven, and she says she has no idea what happened after death. And then the Quaker wedding, quite simple. All went into a room, settled down, and went into quiet time. After a rather long time, one of the Scots whispers to another character and asks, "What's going on?" And a friend says, "I see God has spoken to you." To thee. And the simple wedding started. No music, only vows. It was quite beautiful. Now, I went to a cousin's wedding at a Quaker meeting house, and after it was over, my dad asked me if I had ever been to a Quaker wedding before, and I said no. The man sitting next to me leaned over and says, "You still haven't." After watching Outlander, I understood what he meant. In Outlander, there are tribes of Native Americans that helped fight the British. As for Native Americans helping the colonists in the Revolution, I had to Google that also. I had never heard anything about that in history class or in the movies like Drums Along the Mohawk, where they always took the side of the British. This is what I found out on the internet. The Revolutionary War did not only determine the future of the American colonists, but it also shaped the future of the native peoples who lived around them. Native Americans were not passive observers in the conflict. While most native communities tried to remain neutral in the fighting between the Crown and its colonists, as the war continued, many of them had to make difficult decisions about how and when to support one side or the other. It's sad to learn that the same Native American tribes that helped America gain independence were the same people who within 60 years would be forced to walk west, and that march was called the Trail of Tears, where as many as 16,000 died along the way. This is what I found on Wikipedia. The Trail of Tears was a forced displacement of about 60,000 people of the 5 civilized tribes between 1830 and 1850, and the additional thousands of Native Americans and their enslaved African Americans within that time were ethnically cleansed by the United States government. And now a little history about my mother's side of the family. My mother was proud to be a birthright Quaker. She could trace her family line right back to Levi Coffin. This is what I found about Levi Coffin when I Googled him. Levi Coffin Jr., October 28, 1798 to September 16, 1877, was an American Quaker, abolitionist, farmer, businessman, and humanitarian, an active leader in the Underground Railroad in Indiana and Ohio. Some unofficially called Coffin the president of the Underground Railroad, estimating that 3,000 fugitive slaves passed through his care. The Coffin home in Fountain City, Indiana, is a museum and sometimes called the Underground Railroad's Grand Central Station. My Auntie King lived next door to the Coffin house, and my great-grandfather and great-grandmother Hodgin lived next door to her. Mother always called them the thee and thou Quakers. I was blessed that my mother's people live a long time, and I got to know them quite well. And when my mother spent the summer with them, they went to the meeting house in Fountain City. I've been there. And the men sit on one side, and the women and children sit on the other. Mother said the kids sit in the front row, in front of their mothers, and they would get thumped on the head if they talked or got restless. Now, at West Newton meeting, if the kids were not acting right, they had to sit next to me. And there was another Coffin that my mother was related to, and one I couldn't find anything about on the internet, and that brings me back to the Revolutionary War. My mother's mother, my Grandma Opal, and her sister, my Aunt Mabel, wanted to join DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. Now, you had to have a direct relative that fought in the American Revolution. Now, Grandma and Aunt Mabel were both Quakers and were not sure if any Quakers' relatives did fight in the war, with Quakers being pacifists and not believing in killing. Well, it so happened that although he didn't fight in the war, Dr. Charles Coffin turned his home into a hospital and cared for both colonists and the British. They got to join the group. It would be interesting to know how many lives he saved on both sides and see where their relatives live today, and if he was threatened to be kicked out of his meeting because he did this. Well, that about covers everything I wanted to talk about. I found Outlander most interesting as it covered history from a different viewpoint with different kinds of people. The series was shot in Scotland, and I had no idea how beautiful Scotland is. And it was basically shot by unknown actors from Scotland. Outlander made me proud to be a member of the Society of Friends. Now, I would like to go into quiet time with the Tibetan Buddhist prayer. And I'd like for you to think about all the things that are going on in the world and keep them in the light. May you be at peace. May your heart remain open. May you awaken to the light of your own true nature. May you be healed. May you be the source of healing for all beings.
But Chip, I'm not afraid to sing in front of this group. And I'm going to sing the second verse of John Greenleaf Whittier's hymn. It fits in with your Tibetan meditation. Drop thy still dews of quietness till all our striving cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. A great Quaker poet, and as it turns out, many of his verses were set to music, John Greenleaf Whittier.
Chip, this is Norma. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And when Chip mentioned the Underground Railway of rescuing many people who had been slaves or were slaves at the time, West Newton was very involved in that early on in its 200th history, 200 years of history. Very early in the West Newton history, there were Quaker families that were involved in the Underground Railroad.
What's that, Norma Gaston?
And the family that moved to the house where this was supposedly happening, the saving of the slaves, were the Baldwins. When they moved there, I was in elementary school. And at the time, the mother in the family, Jane Baldwin, said she had heard stories about that property being a part of that whole process of saving the slaves who were trying to get to Canada. And she knocked on every wall of every room in the house, trying to find an empty, hollow kind of sound, thinking that the hidden room was in the house, but never did find it. Several years later, when the farming operation turned from horse-pulled wagon loads into the barn to tractor-pulled wagon loads, the tractors could pull a heavier load. And the men got concerned about the wooden floors in the barn, thinking they might not be strong enough to hold the tractor and the wagon coming in. So they took up the floor, the wooden floor in the barn. And when they did it, they found a little stairway that went down to a room, and there was a little pot sitting at the bottom of that stairway. The hidden room that saved a lot of slaves was in the barn and not the house. So it kind of gives me goosebumps to think about the history of West Newton and people that lived there that were very conscious of helping other people.
I think about the time travel portion of your talk and how we are finding ourselves very close to that portion of the Underground Railroad. There are meeting houses out here helping undocumented workers in the same fashion. These stories are very important for us to learn that history does repeat itself.
We've reached that part of our worship time when some of us need to leave and go to other responsibilities, and others of us can stay here and continue and worship for a while longer. If you're leaving, we wish you Godspeed and hope to see you again next week.
Lauren, thank you for singing. Thank you for playing, Lynn.
And you for an upbeat message to a serious subject today, Chip.
Thank you.
all hearts are clear, we'll bring our meeting for worship to a close. Thank you, Chip, for lots of things to think about today. And it's good to see everybody.
Thank you.
I